Welcome to part 3 of this Sylenth Masterclass video tutorial. In part 1, we looked at this LCD section, and in part 2, we covered the gray strip here and the oscillators for both part A and part B. In this section, part 3, we're going to be discussing really the heart and soul of Sylenth. We're going to be looking at the filters. So you can tell by hearing some sounds in Sylenth that the filters were modeled or created with a lot of attention to detail by Leonard Digital. The crazy thing to me is that Sylenth only has a few filter types as low pass, band pass, and high pass, and then nothing. And we'll cover what all those mean in a second. But when you compare that to synths like Massive, Anna, or now Spire, or just a host of other synths, you get a lot more filter types. So the fact that Sylenth has been so popular for so long really says a lot about how good the filters are. So I have a sound pulled up from Future EDM. So right now it's kind of like a pluck sound. And I have, for oscillator A1 and A2, just 2 saw waves loaded up. And then in part B, I have a little bit of noise going on. Which will really only come out and be visible when I start to mess with this filter, this master filter control. But for this tutorial, for this part, for section 3, we're just going to be discussing the actual filter sections for the part A and part B. So Sylenth gives you, the first thing you'll see is this input select. You have A, B, and then nothing. So if you have it on nothing, you're not going to hear any sound. Because what's happening behind the scenes is that oscillator A1 and oscillator A2 are trying to go somewhere, and you have it off, so it's not going to create any sound. So your really only 2 options that you'd really ever use would be A or A and B. So A means that all the oscillators, whichever ones you're using, one or both, are being routed into filter A. And then this box right here correlates to the filter type. So right now, this straight line means there's no filter selected, so the sound's going to be different than what we just heard. That's just the straight saw waves with the effects that you hear and then the detune applied. So there's no filter going on. So that's what's going on there. And then if you select A and B, now oscillator A and B are both running in, and it visually shows you with that little line that appears. Oscillators both A1, A2, and potentially B1 and B2 are now running into filter A. And that's really cool for sounds that are just, you're trying to stack. Like if I were just stacking a bunch of saw waves to get a huge super saw sound, I could see myself running everything into one filter. But you have control, complete independent control over filter B for part B. So it almost makes more sense to run it into, just have your oscillators for B1 and B2 run into filter B, because then you can apply a different amount of cutoff, potentially add a resonance that's different. You can do different drives amount, and you can have one oscillator's filter at 12 dB and one at 24 dB. And I'll touch on what that means in a second. So let's just go back to having this on A for now. So I'm going to select the first filter type you get, is called a low pass filter. So generally, the gist of a low-pass filter is that it attenuates or boosts all the frequencies above your cutoff point. So here's my cutoff point. So it's cutting out all these frequencies. So as you turn a cutoff knob up, you're going to hear a brighter, bigger, fuller sound. And typically one with more high frequency content. So I'm going to pull up a multimeter in Logic, and I'm going to pull up this analyzer right here. And when I have the cutoff down, see how the frequencies right now are about 62 to maybe a little bit above 1K? And I'll actually pull up a EQ so you can really see what's going on. All right, so let's pull back up the multimeter. So now we have with this sound, with the cutoff set fairly low, if I turn it all the way down, we barely get any sound. So basically, depending on the pitch and the range of your oscillator waveforms, they're always going to be low. It's not like this is going to sweep out everything on the low end. It's just going to add and attenuate a bunch of the high frequencies as you turn it up. And you can see that here. And I'll show you on my EQ plugin as well. So see how there's very, very little content going on, just from 50 to maybe 500. Then as you boost it, you're basically getting from 50 to 10K, which is awesome for a low-pass filter. It's very high quality. So let's talk about this drive and this 12 in dB before we touch on the resonance knob. In Sylenth, the filter contains 4 filter stages, and basically there's some non-linear saturation going on, which is what creates that gooey warmness that is Sylenth filters. So if you add this drive right here, what it's doing is it's telling, so when you turn this cutoff knob, you're basically changing 4 different filters behind the scenes. But when you boost this drive, it's driving each of those filters. And you can see visually what it's doing to the sound. So right now the sound's going from 50 to about 5K, 10K. And if I boost this drive, I now have sound out to 20K. It's probably even extending further, but these visualizers typically only go to 20K because of human hearing. So I'm going to turn back up that sound now and turn the drive down so that the drive knob becomes very, very useful when you want to drive a bass and make it extremely warm, or a lead that needs to be absolutely huge. And of course the resonance knob will add resonance. It'll do a resonance sweep to your filter. So you can see that it's kind of it's attenuating 200 to 5K, which is what's giving it more of that tonal quality. That's true for any resonance and any synth, so there's nothing really special going on there. It's more of just a standard thing that's in most cutoff filters, and filter types for most synths. So let's go on to the next filter type that we have in Sylenth. It is this bandpass. Now a bandpass attenuates frequencies above and below the cutoff frequency, and they basically just let a little bit, so a small band of frequencies pass unchanged. And that's kind of this middle section that you see here. So let's play it. So there it is with the cutoff all the way down. So with the cutoff all the way up, you really don't have any sound. Once you kind of pass halfway or so, it just kind of kills the sound. And now this, going back to, let's solo our part B real quick. The bandpass filter, just as a little tip and trick, is a great filter type for your noise. It kind of makes a bright white noise. I wouldn't consider it white noise because it's a little bit brighter. But you can always use that to kind of control your noise types because you don't get a lot of options in Sylenth. All right, and finally you get a high-pass filter, which is the exact inverse of a low-pass filter. So a high-pass filter attenuates and boosts any frequencies below the cutoff point. So there is a crash course in not only Sylenth filters, but it's the filter types and kind of what they do. Now let's discuss what this knob, right, this little switch, 12 dB and 12 and 24 dB does. So what that's going to do, it's basically telling Sylenth the amount of attenuation or boost that to the filter panel. So this can be switched to 12 dB per octave or 24 dB. So let's go back to our low pass. Let's turn it up past halfway. So there's obviously going to be more of a noticeable effect at the 24 dB than 12 dB. There's going to be more control over the actual filter. So 12 dB lets more of the content through the filter. And again, this drive works a little bit differently with every filter type. So let's go to the bandpass real quick. Has a less noticeable and pronounced effect on the bandpass than it does the low pass. And on the high pass, it's doing something, but it's more of a presence and a perception than something you can really audibly hear. So that basically covers the filter section for the part A and B. Now let's head down to this filter control here, which works independently from your filter A and your filter B. All right, so this filter control here is going to control, it controls both filters potentially from part A and part B, depending on what you have set up. So for this sound, because I have this one oscillator from B1 active with the noise, it's going to control both. So let's play this sound. So what it's doing is it's giving you one knob to be able to control the cutoff frequency of both part A and part B, which is really nice if you're just you're using a preset or you're preset surfing and it's almost there, but it's not fitting your drop, or it needs to be bigger or smaller or more plucky. That's the easiest way to do it. Then you're not going to both part A and part B and changing cutoff values. You're just changing on one knob. And the resonance knob is going to do the exact same thing. It's basically a global resonance knob for both filters A and B. So it's going to kind of boost what's going on. So if I crank up this resonance in A, it gets crazy and that hurts the ears to really listen to, obviously. So that's why it's nice, because if I boost this cutoff and then turn that cutoff up, it's just going to be too much and it's almost a negligible effect. But it is really nice to this drives the to my ear, it drives the cutoff frequencies a little bit harder. And it just makes it that it pushes that little bit extra thickness in there, which can mean all the difference in a mix. So this key tracking knob is really awesome, and it's basically what it does is it'll link the cutoff frequencies of the filters to the pitch of the note that is being played, or whether you're playing it on your keyboard or you have it in a MIDI scroll like I do right now. So when it's set to 0 by default, the cutoff frequency will not be affected by the notes that are being played. So if I hit a C right now, and I turn that key track all the way to 10, the bright harmonics that you're hearing are actually playing a C note. That's why it's so useful, because when you get a huge unison stacked saw, super saw type sound, it's almost like tuning your sub bass or your kick. And if you guys don't know about that, if you're absolute beginners, in almost any genre of music like EDM and hip hop, you're going to want to tune your low frequency content. Well, this allows you to tune your high frequency content as well as your low frequency if you're using bass patches. But for leads, it's especially awesome, because then your cutoff frequencies, because basically what's doing, you can see visually, it's adding a lot of harmonics. It's these overtones that's making a sound bigger and brighter and fuller. But you can actually have those in tune, which is just absolutely awesome. All right, and then finally, this last little knob that we have here is this warm drive, and it just toggles on and off. And the warm drive button makes the filter stages use a higher quality of saturation. So you can just turn that on, keep the cutoff, the master filter down. And then just boost it up a little bit, and you'll start to notice that it becomes cleaner and clearer and a little bit thicker. This, just as a side note, this will increase the CPU hit on your sound, but it is really, really useful if you're using a lot of polyphonic voices. So I only have 2 voices in this sound for each oscillator, so let me turn this up to 6, turn this down a little. It just becomes like buttery smooth. It's kind of Sylenth's voodoo magic. Like I said at the beginning of this part 3 of this video tutorial, the filters are the heart and soul of Sylenth. I think they are why it has been such a popular synth for so long. So that basically concludes everything, all the knobs, all the buttons, all the sliders in the filter section for both part A and part B. Now in part 4 of this masterclass on Sylenth, we're going to move down to the modulation envelopes. And that's going to be probably a 2-part video because there is a lot of options to cover, and we're going to run through each and every one of them. So thanks for watching. I'll see you there.